Jerry O. Green, Black Student Advocate, here out in front of Perris Elementary School District with a parent who's been having several issues with her son being bullied and being assaulted. Ma'am, give us your name and tell us what's going on with your student.
My name is McClendon, and unfortunately I've had several issues with the administration at my son's school. My son's been assaulted, my son's been bullied, my son has had some really terrible things said to him, and the administration seems to keep overlooking and not taking seriously my concerns.
Okay, let's go back to the first incident, because I know it happened in several different schools. The first incident.
Well, the first school that it occurred at was Innovative Horizons, and what ended up happening was my son's backpack was taken away from him, and a group of 4 boys played keep away, and one of the boys ended up, in the process of trying to keep my son's backpack away from him, socked my son in his face. And so I had a big concern about that. I contacted the school, and no one got back to me. It took days and days, and the same 4 group of boys continued to bully my son. It got to the point where one of the boys told my son that he was so black that they couldn't see him. They were passing around a black piece of paper, and they were saying that the black piece of paper was my son. One of the boys also called my son Hitler, and they just said all kind of mean and derogatory things to my son on several different occasions. He notified a teacher, and he notified the teacher on at least 3 different occasions, and all she did was simply tell my son to just move away from them or to stop interrupting her class when he voiced his concerns to her.
So then, this was at Innovative Horizon. How long ago did this happen, and how long was the process of you trying to rectify the situation at that school site?
Oh, it happened in October, and it took almost 2 months for them to help me. It got to the point where I had to call Jerry, had to go down to the district office, and I kept calling, kept coming in, and it was like my voice was not being heard. Unfortunately, my son would continue to be bullied throughout this time, and it seemed like they didn't return my calls. Everybody was always busy. They didn't see the severity of the situation until I had to go to the district and ask Jerry for assistance. Then they finally wanted to hear me out.
So that happened at the first school. Did anything happen in between before you transferred your student to another school here in the district?
Yeah, my son, I guess he passed out at school on the yard. He had been being bullied all day. They were saying some really terrible things to him, calling him Hitler, and just making fun of the darkness of his skin. And he went to, actually the yard duty took him to the nurse, and the nurse called me, and she explained to me that she didn't know why they had moved him, that anytime a student falls out of school that they're supposed to call 911. And so the nurse was really, really upset because they didn't properly treat my son during that situation. And it was that day when the assistant principal finally decided that she wanted to hear what I was saying. And after that, like I said, I kind of tried to work with them, but the same stuff continued to happen. They made excuses for the teacher who didn't report the other students' behavior. They supposedly sent her to training, but they could not transfer my son out of her class, so I decided that it would be best if I moved my son to another school.
So what school did you actually move your student to?
I moved him to Skyview, and one of the reasons being is that he was at that school previously, but they changed principals, and so I moved him back over to Skyview, but we've definitely had a different type of experience since the principal from last year is no longer there.
So a totally different atmosphere.
Totally different climate, totally different atmosphere, and it shows.
So what kind of issues did your student have now at Skyview?
There's been several different issues at Skyview. One which my son, his phone was taken out of his pockets by a group of girls, and during this situation, trying to get his phone back, my son, pushed the little girl and tried to get his phone back. And the yard duty sent them all to the office. No one notified me of the situation. My son's phone, his screen was cracked. So when he got home and he told me what happened, I called down to the school and the principal told me that he was still investigating and that he's so sorry that he didn't get in contact with me regarding the situation. But even then, he never called me back. I had to keep continuing to call him. And what ended up happening was one of the young ladies, she came back to school the next day and told my son that her dad told her that she should have effed my son up for pushing her in attempts to get his phone back. And when I brought this concern to the principal that, well, my son is being threatened now because of the situation, he kind of just brushed it off like it was no big deal. Anytime my son is a victim or something happens to my son, it seems like the principal just brushes it off like it's no big deal.
So have you had any other instances where your son was accused and then the judgment was swift versus when he's a victim, slow to react?
Yeah, there were actually 2 incidents. One incident, my son was sent to the office for laughing. Something happened in class and he laughed at whatever was happening at another student, and I was called for that situation, and the principal was like, well, when people laugh at other people, it hurts their feelings, and he went through this whole thing about how my son shouldn't laugh. And I asked the principal, I said, well, were there other students in the class laughing? And he's like, well, I'm sure that there were, but it hurt this particular student's feelings when my son laughed. And I thought that was kind of odd if there were other people in the classroom laughing, that my son would be the one that is sent to the office, and then the principal will call me about that. But when my son has been victimized, the principal doesn't call me or doesn't notify me when something happens to my son. There was also another incident on the PE field where they were playing football. I guess the coach told them to throw it to their partner, and so several kids were throwing the football the wrong way, according to the coach. So when the coach called me and we had a conversation about it, he told me that when Chris threw the football, it had hit another student. I asked, was the other student hurt? And he told me, well, no, but I told Chris that in the real world, judges aren't going to take his excuses, and he was making up a bunch of excuses about the other students throwing the football the wrong way. And like I asked the coach, I said, well, if it's by your own admission that everybody was kind of throwing the football wherever, why would you respond to my son in that way? If you were able to redirect everyone and simply tell them to just throw the football the right way, why would you make the statement that in the real world, that in front of a judge, no judge is going to take my son's excuse, implying that my son would be in jail in the future? I thought that was really crazy. And all the PE teacher could do was apologize to me.